My parents gave my apartment to my brother's family. Now they expect me to pay rent while I sleep in a storage closet. The realtor had called them Viridian panels, and she'd said the name with the kind of reverence usually reserved for a groundbreaking piece of art or a minor deity. I just called them the windows, but even I had to admit they were the main reason I signed the lease. The apartment itself was a shoebox, a hyper-efficient, minimalist cube of white walls and gray floors in a newly erected skyscraper that promised the future of urban living. It was the kind of place that felt less like a home and more like a docking station for a human being. But the windows, oh, the windows. The entire west-facing wall wasn't glass, but a seamless, floor-to-ceiling screen that could, with a tap on a control panel or a simple voice command, become anything I wanted. Show me a rainy night in Tokyo, I'd murmur, and instantly the sterile white wall would dissolve into a breathtaking, photorealistic view of Shinjuku, neon signs bleeding onto wet asphalt, digital raindrops streaking down the pane with such convincing physics that I'd instinctively check my own floor for puddles. Take me to a beach in the Maldives, and the room would be flooded with brilliant, turquoise light, the gentle lapping of waves filling the small space with a soothing, ambient hum. It was the ultimate escape. I was a junior data analyst who spent 8 hours a day staring at spreadsheets, and my actual view from the 47th floor was of the perpetually smoggy, concrete and steel maze of the city. These windows were my portal, my prize for buying into the developer's sleek, soulless vision of the future. For the first month, it was a dream. I'd eat my takeout ramen while watching a blizzard rage over the Swiss Alps. I'd fall asleep to the sight of the aurora borealis shimmering over a silent, Norwegian fjord. I showed it off to the few friends I had, their jaws dropping on cue as I switched from a bustling Parisian street to the serene, zero-gravity ballet of the Earth as seen from the International Space Station. It's not just a video, man, I'd explain, tapping the panel. It's dynamic. The weather changes, the time of day is synced. It's a live simulation. The novelty was intoxicating. It was the perfect illusion of a life I didn't have, a world of travel and beauty I couldn't afford. The first glitch was subtle, so subtle I thought I'd imagined it. I had the window set to a tranquil bamboo forest in Kyoto. The digital sun was filtering through the dense green stalks, and the sound of a gentle breeze was playing through the apartment's integrated speakers. For just a fraction of a second, the entire forest flickered, replaced by an image of a brightly lit, sterile-looking hallway with a scuff mark on the linoleum floor. It was gone before my brain could fully process it, the bamboo scene snapping back into place as if nothing had happened. I blinked, chalking it up to a momentary software hiccup. The building was new, after all. Bugs were to be expected. But then it happened again a few days later. I was enjoying a sunset over the Grand Canyon, the immense digital chasm filled with fiery oranges and purples. For a full second, the canyon vanished and was replaced by a close-up of a kitchen sink, a dirty plate sitting in it, a yellow sponge resting on the edge. The image was mundane, boring, and utterly jarring. It was also incredibly high resolution. I could see the brand name on the dish soap, the tiny flecks of dried food on the plate. Then, just as before, it was gone, and I was back in Arizona. This time, I felt a prickle of unease. I went to the control panel, a sleek black tablet embedded in the wall, and looked for a diagnostic tool. I found a log file, but it was filled with encrypted jargon I couldn't decipher. I sent a maintenance request through the building's resident portal, describing the issue as scenery panels flickering to random images. The response I got an hour later was a generic, pre-written message: "We are aware of minor software instabilities in the Viridian system and our technicians are deploying patches. We appreciate your patience." Minor instabilities. That's what they called it. The glitches started to become more frequent and more specific. They were no longer split-second flickers. They would last for several seconds, sometimes almost a minute. And they were always of interiors. A child's bedroom, toys scattered on the floor, a mobile of cartoon rockets hanging over a crib. A living room, a large television playing a news report I couldn't hear, a half-empty glass of wine on a coffee table. A bathroom, steam fogging the mirror, a blue towel hanging crookedly on a hook. Each scene was silent, a brief, stolen snapshot of a life in progress. I realized with a dawning, creeping horror that these weren't stock photos or random assets from a developer's library. They felt real. They felt lived in. The details were too specific, too mundane, too authentic. The scuff marks on the walls, the clutter on the desks, the specific way a pair of shoes were kicked off by a doorway. My apartment building was one of 3 identical towers in a massive new development complex. Were these windows, were they showing me views from other apartments? The thought was so profoundly disturbing that I tried to dismiss it. It had to be a bug, a weird cross-wiring of the system's data streams. But the feeling of being an unwilling voyeur was inescapable. I started leaving the windows off, preferring to stare at the blank white wall. But the silence and the blankness were somehow worse. The apartment felt smaller, more claustrophobic than ever. I'd inevitably give in, turning on a placid scene of a rolling Irish countryside, only to have it interrupted by a 5-second view of someone's unmade bed, the sheets rumpled, an indentation still on the pillow. I tried to cover the window. I bought a huge, heavy blackout curtain, the kind designed to block every photon of light. The first night I hung it up, I felt a sense of relief. But as I was lying in bed, a faint light began to emanate from behind the thick fabric. I got up and pulled the curtain aside. The image of a home office, a laptop glowing on a desk, was being projected directly onto the back of the curtain, faint but unmistakable. It was as if the window wanted to be seen. It was no longer just displaying images, it was broadcasting them, forcing them into my space. The maintenance department was no help. I called them this time, refusing to use the impersonal resident portal. The man on the other end of the line sounded bored. Yes, the Viridian patch is still being rolled out. Some units are experiencing more significant data overlaps than others. The engineers are working on it. Data overlaps. That was the new corporate sanitized term for it. He suggested I try resetting the system by holding down the power button for 30 seconds. I did. It didn't work. The glitches became my new, unsettling reality. I started to recognize places. The child's bedroom with the rocket mobile. The kitchen with the yellow sponge. The living room with the crooked painting of a ship at sea. I was seeing the daily, silent rhythm of my neighbors' lives. I saw a couple having a muted argument, their gestures sharp and angry. I saw a man sitting alone in the dark, his face illuminated only by his phone screen. I saw a woman practicing yoga, her form perfect and serene. I never saw their faces clearly, the angles were always strange, as if the viewpoint was from a high corner of the room or from an odd, low perspective. But I saw their spaces, their private sanctuaries. I felt a profound sense of guilt, of shame. I was an intruder, yet I couldn't look away. It was a terrifying, addictive, and deeply lonely experience. Then, about a week ago, everything changed. I had the window set to a view of a tranquil Zen garden. I needed the calm. My nerves were frayed. The glitches had been happening almost every hour. Suddenly, the raked sand and mossy stones vanished. But this time, it wasn't a brief flicker, and it wasn't one of the familiar apartments. The window didn't return to my chosen scenery. It stayed locked on this new image. The view was of a room I had never seen before. It was dark, grimy. The walls were unpainted concrete, stained with watermarks. A single, bare bulb hung from a cord in the center of the ceiling, casting harsh, yellow light in deep shadows. There was no furniture, except for a single, straight-backed wooden chair in the middle of the room. And in that chair, a person was sitting. They were tied to it. Ropes were wrapped tightly around their chest, their arms bound to the chair's arms, their legs tied to its legs. A dirty-looking cloth was tied over their mouth as a gag, and a black bag was pulled down over their head. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. They were completely still. My blood ran cold. I stumbled back, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't a data overlap. This wasn't a neighbor's living room. This was something else entirely. This was violent. This was a crime. I lunged for the control panel, my fingers frantically tapping at the screen. I tried to turn it off, to change the scene, anything. Nothing happened. The screen was unresponsive. The image of the captive in the concrete room remained, unwavering, silent. I tried the voice commands. Window off. I yelled, my voice cracking. Show me the beach. Show me anything. Nothing. The window was locked on this horrific tableau. I felt a wave of panic so intense it made me dizzy. I was watching a kidnapping. A hostage situation. Live. From the comfort of my futuristic shoebox apartment. My first instinct was to call the police. But what would I say? Hello, police? My apartment window, which is actually a giant TV screen, is showing me a live feed of a person tied to a chair. No, I don't know where it is. No, I don't know who they are. It's just, on my wall. They would think I was insane, or high, or both. They'd send a wellness check, not a SWAT team. I'd be the crazy guy in the smart building who couldn't tell reality from his TV. I spent the next hour pacing my tiny apartment, running my hands through my hair, my eyes constantly darting back to the silent, terrifying scene on the wall. The person in the chair hadn't moved. Were they even alive? I had to do something. I had to be smart. I became a detective. I forced myself to calm down, to breathe, to observe. I pulled my desk chair up to the window, sitting inches from the screen, and I studied the image for clues. The room was a cellar, or a basement. The concrete walls were featureless, except for a dark, rectangular shape on the far wall. A door? A window boarded up? I couldn't tell. The floor was dusty concrete as well. There was nothing. No identifying marks, no clues to a location. It was a generic, anonymous prison. 4 hours, nothing changed. The only movement was the slight, almost imperceptible rise and fall of the captive's chest. They were alive. Thank God. The silence was the worst part. The window, which usually provided ambient sound, was completely mute. It was like watching a nightmare on a broken television. Sometime after midnight, a figure entered the frame. A man. He was tall, dressed in dark work clothes, and he wore a simple, white, expressionless mask, the kind you'd buy at a craft store. He moved with a slow, deliberate confidence that terrified me. He didn't look at the captive. He walked over to a corner of the room that was previously in shadow and picked something up. A bucket of water and a rag. He methodically, almost gently, began to wipe a section of the concrete floor. It was such a bizarre, domestic action in such a horrific context. He was cleaning. Why was he cleaning? After a few minutes, he dropped the rag back in the bucket, pushed it back into the corner, and left the room through the dark rectangle on the wall, which was indeed a door. He hadn't said a word. He hadn't even looked at his prisoner. The sight of him, so calm and methodical, shattered my last hope that this was some kind of elaborate prank or a movie. This was real. The man's movements were too natural, too unstaged. I was the sole witness to a living nightmare, and I was utterly powerless. The next day, I called in sick to work. I couldn't leave the apartment. I couldn't tear my eyes from the window. I ordered food delivery and ate my meals in front of the screen, watching the motionless figure in the chair. The masked man came back twice. Once to bring a small bowl of something food, and hold it up to the captive's gagged mouth, though I couldn't tell if they ate anything. The second time, he just stood there for a few minutes, staring at his prisoner, his head tilted slightly as if in contemplation. Then he left. The helplessness was eating me alive. I felt like I was complicit, a silent partner in this crime just by watching it. I had to find a clue. I started taking pictures of the screen with my phone, zooming in, trying to find anything I might have missed. The ropes, the chair, the concrete, the door. Nothing. It was a featureless box of despair. I tried to think outside the box. The glitches before, they were from other apartments in the complex. What if this was, too? What if this room was somewhere in one of the three towers? I spent an entire afternoon looking at the architectural plans for the building complex, which I found on the developer's website. I looked for basements, sublevels, storage areas. There were some, but they were all mapped out, filled with utility conduits, water heaters, and HVAC systems. Nothing that looked like a simple, empty concrete room. I even tried to use the view itself as a clue. There were no windows in the room, but what if I could see something through the doorway when the man entered or left? I replayed the photos on my phone, zooming in on the dark rectangle of the door when it was open. In the sliver of space visible behind him, I could see more concrete. A hallway, just as bleak as the room itself. No help there. By the third day, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept. I was living on coffee and protein bars. My own apartment had become a prison, my only view a window into a far worse one. I was starting to lose my grip, to question my own sanity. Was this real? Was I hallucinating? Was the stress of my job and my isolated life finally making me crack? I was staring at the screen, my eyes burning with exhaustion, when I saw it. It was tiny. Insignificant. But it was there. On the wall, just to the left of the captive's head, was a small imperfection in the concrete. A chip. It was shaped vaguely like a crescent moon. I'd seen it before but had dismissed it. But now, staring at it, a flicker of something sparked in my memory. A crescent-shaped chip in a wall. Why did that feel familiar? I stood up and walked around my own apartment, my eyes scanning my own perfect, sterile white walls. Nothing. Of course not. My walls were pristine. I sat back down, frustrated. It was nothing. Just my sleep-deprived brain trying to make connections where there were none. I leaned my head back and stared at my own ceiling. And that's when I saw it. Not on the ceiling itself, but on the wall, high up near the corner where the wall met the ceiling, partially hidden by the shadow of a light fixture. A small, crescent-shaped chip in the plaster. It must have happened during construction, a worker's tool hitting the wall, and they just painted over it. It was barely noticeable. I had lived here for almost 2 months and had never seen it before. My breath caught in my throat. I looked from the chip on my wall to the chip on the wall in the window. They were identical. The same size, the same shape, the same orientation. It couldn't be. It was impossible. A coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. With a trembling hand, I picked up my phone and zoomed in on one of the pictures I'd taken of the window. I was looking for more. Any other detail? The floor. The floor in the window was dusty concrete. My floor was polished gray laminate. The walls in the window were raw, stained concrete. My walls were painted a clean, sterile white. It wasn't my apartment. It couldn't be. But the chip, it was identical. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe all the apartments were built with the same flaws? Maybe the construction crews were sloppy and made the same mistake in every unit on the 47th floor? It seemed unlikely. I started to look at the image on the window with new, terrified eyes. I wasn't just looking for clues about the location anymore. I was looking for connections to my own space. The light. The single, bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. I looked up at my own light fixture. It was a modern, flush-mounted LED panel. Nothing alike. But the position of the light, the way it cast shadows in the room on the window, it was centered in the room, just like my light fixture. The shadows it cast fell in the same places they would in my apartment if the furniture were gone and the light was a single, bare bulb. A cold, heavy dread began to pool in my stomach. It felt like ice water spreading through my veins. I looked at the door in the window. The dark rectangle on the far wall. It was in the exact same position as the door to my own apartment's single closet. I stumbled over to my closet and threw the door open. It was full of my clothes, a vacuum cleaner, a box of old books. It wasn't a concrete hallway. But the placement, it was perfect. My apartment wasn't a shoebox. It was a cube. A perfect, symmetrical cube. The layout was brutally simple. And the room and the window, it had the exact same dimensions. The exact same proportions. It was a stripped-down, raw version of my own apartment. It was like looking at the architectural skeleton of the room I was standing in. The thought was so monstrous, so impossible, that I laughed. A short, sharp, hysterical bark of a laugh. The window wasn't showing me a room somewhere else. It was showing me this room. My room. But stripped bare, raw, and in the future? Or the past? Was this what it looked like before they finished it? No, that didn't make sense. The captive, the chair, that wasn't construction. A new theory, even more insane than the last, began to form in my mind. The Viridian panels. It's not just a video, man. It's dynamic. It's a live simulation. What if it wasn't simulating a beach in the Maldives? What if it was simulating a possibility? A future event? What if the data overlaps weren't from other apartments, but from other potential realities connected to this specific physical space? It was the logic of a madman, but it was the only explanation that fit. I was looking at a premonition. A warning. A vision of something terrible that was going to happen in the very room I was standing in. And the person in the chair, who was the person in the chair? I had never been able to see their face, or their hair, or any part of their body clearly. They were just a shape, a mannequin of suffering. But now, I had to know. I stared at the screen, my focus absolute. The masked man hadn't been back all day. The captive was still, their head bowed. I needed a different angle. I needed to see their face. I looked around my own apartment, at the reflective surfaces. My television, which was off. My microwave screen. The black, glossy surface of the control panel on the wall. In the window, in the horrific scene, there were no reflective surfaces. Just concrete and dust and despair. Except, maybe there was one. In the corner of the room on the screen, near where the masked man kept the bucket, was a dark patch on the floor. It looked like a water stain, but it was darker than the others, and it had a slight sheen to it. A puddle. When the man had been cleaning, maybe he'd spilled some water. It had been there for days, and it hadn't evaporated. Odd. I stared at that puddle on the screen, my heart pounding. It was a long shot. A desperate, insane long shot. But it was all I had. I needed the angle to be just right. I waited. For what, I didn't know. An hour passed. Then 2. The scene remained static, a frozen moment of horror. Then, something changed. The captive in the chair stirred. They moved their head, just slightly, a slow, tired movement, as if waking from a long sleep. They lifted their head and turned it, just a fraction, towards the corner with the puddle. And for one, crystal clear, heart-stopping second, I saw their face. Reflected. Perfectly. In the dark puddle on the floor. And the face was my own. It was me. My eyes, my nose, my mouth, my hair. It was me, older, maybe, with a few more lines around my eyes, my face gaunt with terror and exhaustion. But it was me. I was staring at a reflection of myself, tied to a chair, in my own apartment. The window wasn't a window to another place. It was a window to my future. To my own gruesome, terrifying fate. The air left my lungs in a silent scream. The room started to spin. I fell back, away from the window, scrambling on the floor like a crab, trying to get away from the image of my own death. My back hit the wall. I sat there, gasping, my mind a whirlwind of pure, undiluted terror. It was all a trap. The apartment, the windows, the future of urban living. It was a cage, and I had walked right into it. I was going to die here. In this room. Tied to a chair. The only question was when. The sound of a keycard sliding into the lock on my front door was so quiet, I almost missed it. But in the dead silence of my terror, it was as loud as a gunshot. I froze, my blood turning to ice. I wasn't expecting anyone. My food had already been delivered. No one else had a key. Except. I remembered the email from building management yesterday. The one I'd barely glanced at. Security upgrade notification. As part of our ongoing commitment to resident safety, we are upgrading the keycard encryption. Please pick up your new keycard from the front desk at your earliest convenience. Your old card will be deactivated tomorrow at 9 p.m. I had picked it up this morning. I hadn't even thought about it. The lock beeped, a cheerful, electronic sound that signaled my doom. The door swung open. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, dressed in dark work clothes. And in his hand, he held a simple, white, expressionless mask.